There's a moment that Taurus knows better than they'd like to admit. That instant when you're doing something you promised you wouldn't do again. Not because you forgot, not because you're weak, but because something inside you is bigger than any promise you made to yourself. It could be food. It could be a purchase that didn't fit the budget. It could be that person you started contacting again, knowing you shouldn't. It could be excessive silence, isolation, the refusal to change anything even when it hurts. It could be overwork, excessive pleasure, or the emptiness disguised as routine that never questions anything. Whatever it may be, Taurus knows the cycle. Promise, lapse, guilt, promise again. And the question no one asks is, what if this cycle isn't a character flaw? What if it's a message? I need to tell you something that perhaps no one has told you yet. Taurus is the sign that operates most through the language of the body, of desire, of matter. More than any other sign, you feel the world before you think about it. You don't analyze pleasure, you feel it first. And your nervous system, your impulses, your deepest desires, they have never been separate from your spirituality. Never. So when an addiction takes hold in Taurus, it's not there despite who you are, it's there precisely because of who you are, and that distinction changes everything. Think about it. A Taurus's addiction is almost never random. It appears at a specific moment, after a loss of security, after a betrayal that shook the ground beneath their feet, after a period of instability that you had to go through alone, in silence, because Taurus doesn't crumble in front of others. Never. And then the body finds a substitute for what's missing. The Taurus body is incredibly intelligent, more than you give it credit for. It knows you're hungry, not for food, not for shopping, not for anything that addiction truly delivers, but for something it imitates with disconcerting precision: security, presence, the feeling that there is firm ground beneath your feet. And addiction delivers that. For a few minutes, sometimes for hours, enough time for something inside you to breathe again. This is not weakness, this is adaptation. It's your system doing the only thing it knows how to do when what you need most isn't available. The real question is, what is missing? And why is it missing? Because addiction isn't the problem for Taurus. Addiction is the symptom. And behind every symptom there is a cause. And behind that cause there is something even deeper. Something that God, the universe, your own soul, never tires of trying to show you. But the message never comes in words. It comes as an impulse, as desire, as compulsion. It comes precisely through the language that Taurus understands best, the language of the body. And here's what becomes increasingly clear when you stop to look honestly. Taurus's addiction isn't random. It follows a precise pattern. It appears in the same types of situations, triggered by the same types of wounds. Always after a shock to their sense of security, always in moments when the ground that Taurus builds with such care begins to crack. And when you start to see this pattern, when you realize it's not an accident, that there's a logic behind the whole cycle, that the addiction didn't choose its target by chance, a very uncomfortable question emerges. A question that becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. What exactly is this pattern trying to show you about what you need most? What exactly is this pattern trying to show you? This question lingered for a reason, because when you see the pattern, you see the message. And when you truly see the message, the addiction begins to lose the language it always used with you. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path, that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose. For Taurus, it works in a very particular way. It doesn't tell you what to do. It helps you understand what you're really asking for, that deep hunger that addiction imitates but never manages to satisfy. It's like finally having words for something you only knew as a burden, like that repetition that didn't make sense until suddenly it starts to. It's not a product, it's an attitude, a new way of relating to that direct channel between body, desire, and the divine that is unique to Taurus. You are now in a rare state. That discomfort that lingered within you while you listened is a window. And windows don't stay open forever. Most people feel this calling and wait. But the right moment is now, precisely while you are still feeling it. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And before we continue, tell me in the comments, what vice do you feel is trying to tell you something? It could be that small habit that always comes back at the most predictable moments. Write it down. Sometimes naming it is the first step to listening. Taurus carries a protective structure that very few people can see from the outside. It's a structure made of routine, comfort, accumulated habit, and certainty built brick by brick over years. And while this structure remains intact, Taurus operates with a stability that seems almost superhuman, calm, consistent, present in a way that other signs rarely manage to be. But when the ground shakes, and at some point it always does, something happens inside that rarely appears to the outside world. The system doesn't visibly collapse. It collapses silently. The kind you hide so well that sometimes even you take a while to realize it's happening. And it is precisely there that addiction assumes a function that is not random. It doesn't enter as a weakness. It enters as an anchor, as a simulation of solid ground. For a few minutes, a few hours, your nervous system manages to believe that there is still stability, that there is still something that won't go away. Imagine you're in a room, and the floor is giving way beneath your feet. You don't know where the hole is, you don't know the extent of the damage, and you need to find something, anything to support your weight while you try to understand what's happening. Addiction is that something, imperfect, temporary, but present when nothing else seems to be. The question isn't about judging oneself for finding this support. The question is, what made the ground give way? Because it is there, in that answer, that the message is hidden. Taurus builds the firmest ground of all the signs, but sometimes, in trying to keep everything firm, Taurus also freezes. It stops letting in what needs to come in. It stops letting go of what should have already gone. And then the ground it built with such care begins to crumble from within, not from the instability that comes from outside, but from the weight of everything that has been dammed up inside. And addiction appears precisely to release some of that pressure, not in a healthy way, but in a way that is effective in the short term, effective enough for the pattern to repeat itself, effective enough for the body to learn that this is the path to relief. But there's a question that changes everything when you finally ask it. What if there was a way to release that pressure without needing the addiction? What if the tightness you feel, that state that comes before the impulse, was, in itself, the message? Because God doesn't speak to Taurus through air signals. He doesn't speak through sudden, ready-made intuitions. He speaks through the body. He speaks through desire. He speaks through compulsion. He speaks exactly in the way that Taurus is most able to feel, and which Taurus, paradoxically, learns to ignore most when it becomes too painful. Imagine a poorly tuned radio. The transmission is coming in, the signal is there, but there's too much static to understand the message clearly, and then, without realizing it, you turn up the volume trying to hear better, without realizing that what's increasing is the static along with the signal. The message gets louder, the noise too. This is what Taurus's addiction is like when you fight it without trying to understand it. The impulse becomes more frequent, the cycle becomes shorter, the guilt becomes heavier. The only way to truly hear the message is to stop fighting the noise and start tuning in to the signal. God is speaking to you through a noise that you yourself have learned to create so as not to hear the silence that follows. This is disturbing, and it's true. And it's exactly the kind of truth that Taurus carries inside without ever having the vocabulary for it. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, offers specific work for Taurus on how this sign receives and processes messages from the spiritual plane. Not through the mind, not through the classic intuition of the water signs, but through the body, through desire, through a compulsion that seems irrational until you learn the language behind it. When you read this content, you begin to see your own pattern from an angle that was never possible before. The static begins to diminish, and the signal finally begins to be heard. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. So how does one tune into the signal? How does Taurus stop fighting the noise and start listening to what is being transmitted? First, you need to understand what really happens during a relapse, because a relapse isn't what it seems, and as long as you don't understand what it really is, it will continue to be interpreted as evidence that there's no point in trying, as proof that you are weaker than you should be, as a reason to give up or to feel deeply ashamed. Most people, and many Tauruses as well, interpret relapse as a setback, as lost ground, as if all the effort had gone to waste. But Taurus's relapse, when you observe it with the calm it deserves, almost always happens precisely when a layer of protection begins to give way, when something that was buried begins to move, when the transformation process truly begins to happen, and the nervous system, which at some point learned that transformation is synonymous with loss, activates an automatic safety protocol. Addiction is that protocol. Taurus, at some point in life, often long before they had words for what they were feeling, learned that when things change, something is lost. That openness leads to vulnerability. That trusting too much, feeling too much, exposing too much, it costs. It costs dearly, and the system built a clever defense. When things start to move internally, when a real transformation is about to happen, addiction appears to slow everything down, to bring the body back to a familiar state, to protect Taurus from going too deep. Addiction acts to interrupt the process, not because addiction is the enemy, but because the system has learned that even well-being can be lost. And if well-being can be lost, it's better not to have too much well-being. It's better to stay with the known, the controllable, the familiar that hurts in a predictable way. This is protection, a protection that arrived too late to be useful and too early to be unlearned without awareness. And this is where the real work begins. Not the work of overcoming addiction, the work of understanding why your system still believes that transformation is dangerous, why your body still treats openness as a threat, why Taurus, the most constructive sign of all, still carries somewhere the belief that building too much means having more to lose. When you understand this, not just intellectually but from within, you begin to realize that the relapse wasn't a failure. It was a message saying you were getting close, the wound is still here, don't give up now. Relapse as a sign that you were getting close to the wound that needed to be seen. This changes your relationship with your own process. It transforms guilt into information. It transforms what seemed like failure into a map of what still needs attention. The book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, addresses this specific transition that Taurus needs to make. The journey from compulsive protection to conscious abundance. From using addiction as armor to learning that you no longer need armor, that the security you've sought outside your whole life can be built from within. This is the content that illuminates this turning point in a way that is rarely found, and it has limited availability. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. So how does Taurus stop protecting itself from its own transformation? The answer that nobody wants to hear and which is the only true one, is that it's not through willpower. Willpower is the instrument of struggle, and fighting against the vice of Taurus is like fighting against water. The more force you apply, the more it finds its way through, the more it seeps into the spaces you can't plug at the same time. The more it tires you until you no longer have the strength to resist, and then it takes over with a speed that seems cruel, but was predictable from the beginning. What really works for Taurus isn't fighting. It's presence, it's attention, it's the ability to sit with the impulse instead of acting on it. To let the wave come, to feel it come, to feel its weight, to feel its force, without jumping into it. This is completely different from ignoring. Ignoring is another form of escape, and Taurus is already very good at silent escape, at making it seem like everything is fine on the outside while something is screaming inside. What I'm talking about is something much more difficult and much more transformative: remaining. Feeling the impulse without becoming the impulse. Observing the desire without merging with it. And in that space between impulse and action, which is usually half a second but can be expanded with practice, asking with genuine curiosity, what is happening inside me right now? Not with judgment, not with that voice you already know will disappoint you, with genuine curiosity, with the same attention that Taurus gives to the things they love, because when you ask with curiosity, the answer comes, maybe not immediately, but it comes, and the answer, when it arrives, is rarely what you expected to find. Sometimes it's loneliness. Sometimes it's the old fear of not being enough for the people who matter. Sometimes it's a sadness that hasn't found space to exist for so long that it's been kept so deep that you almost don't feel it anymore. Sometimes it's anger at something Taurus has kept for so long that it doesn't even remember its origin anymore, but that the body has never forgotten. Whatever it is, when you stop running and start listening, the thing that was asking for attention finally gets it. And when it finally gets it, it no longer needs to shout. Taurus possesses a capacity that few signs have, the ability to remain unshaken in the face of what would be devastating to others. But this same strength, when directed inward, when used not to resist the external, but to remain present with the internal, becomes something else, something that goes beyond resistance, something that leads to real transformation. And that's exactly what happened to every Taurus who learned to read the message behind the addiction. They didn't become a different person. They became a more whole version of themselves, as if a missing part, a part that was being imitated by the addiction, replaced and never truly satisfied, finally returned to its rightful place. The root found real water. And when the root finds real water, it stops searching everywhere at once. It stops growing desperately in all directions, trying not to die of thirst. It deepens. It becomes silent. It stays. The root that finds real water. That's the image of Taurus after the message is finally received. Not after overcoming addiction by force, after hearing what it's been saying all along and responding to that need in a real way, a way the addiction never could. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac, signed to a life of purpose, was conceived for this exact moment, not before when you're still struggling, but for now, when recognition is already active, and you feel you're on the verge of an understanding that can change your relationship with everything that came before. It illuminates the path from the inside out, just the way Taurus needs it. And this content is limited. It won't be here forever. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There is a truth about Taurus that this video has tried to illuminate from the beginning, and that perhaps now makes different sense than it did before. Taurus doesn't have vices because it's weak. Taurus has vices because it's deeply sensitive to a language the world rarely honors, the language of the body, of desire, of real need. And when that language isn't heard, when real needs find no space, when the ground Taurus so desperately needs disappears from beneath its feet, the body finds an alternative path. It always does. The Taurus body doesn't give up. It never has. And God, the universe, your soul, whatever name you give to that which is always greater than you, never stopped sending the message. In every impulse, in every cycle that repeated itself, in every relapse that you interpreted as failure, but which was actually a call to stop, to listen, to ask what you truly need, not what the addiction says you need, what the deepest part of you always knew you were asking for. Taurus was made to put down roots. It was made to build, to create abundance in a way that only Taurus knows how, with patience, with body, with absolute presence in what is being done. But the truest abundance is not built with more accumulation. It is not built with more control. It is built with listening, with presence, with the willingness to listen to one's own soul, even when it speaks in ways that seem wrong, that seem shameful, that seem the opposite of what you would be if you were well. You are more than your addiction. You always have been. And now that you're starting to listen, now that the code is beginning to make sense, that the messenger is beginning to be recognized, perhaps the silence that follows will be the most beautiful you've ever felt. This is the ground that doesn't shake.